Hello and welcome to another bikepacking video. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can go on your first ever bikepacking trip. I'm going to cover everything that you need to know, be that from the bike that you've got, the equipment that you need, how to plan a route, absolutely everything so that you're ready to tackle your first ever bikepacking trip. Okay, so you've decided that you want to go for a bikepacking trip, which is amazing. Bikepacking can be so rewarding. It really does take an element of confidence to start doing it, but once you have tried it and things go well, it can be really, really enjoyable and it can be a really great escape from the everyday, and it's just a great thing to do. So if you've made that decision, I commend you, well done. What do you do now? Well, first things first, I would say analyse the situation. So, how fit are you? Number one. What sort of bike have you got? What equipment have you got? I would always say to people, don't go out and buy specific bikepacking bags or new equipment if you haven't tested it, you haven't tried bikepacking. You don't really know if you're going to like it or not. It's not for everybody. So before you do any of that, have a look and think about what you've got already, how fit you are, because that's going to determine the route that we take and the distance. And basically, from that point onwards, once we've established that, we can start looking in a little bit more detail so that you're ready to tackle your adventure. The first question I get asked all the time is, do I need to go out and buy a specific bikepacking bike? The answer, well, short answer is no, you don't. Depending on what you've got, that will dictate what you can do. But if you start getting more and more into bikepacking, you might want to have a bike that kind of does a bit of everything, that's maybe got wider tyre clearance or can carry lots of stuff. It might have lots of bottle cage mounts or different pannier mounts that you can use, so you can take more stuff with you. But for now, the best bike for bikepacking is the one that you've already got. Okay, so looking at the bike that you've got, that's going to determine the route. If you've got a mountain bike or you've got a cyclocross bike or something that's got more knobbly tyres that can maybe handle some more off-road, then that does open up more options for us. It means that we can pretty much expect any sort of terrain and it won't necessarily be a problem for us. If you've only got a road bike, that's still absolutely fine. Most of my first bikepacking trips were done just on a standard road bike, and they were some of the best that I did and some of the most enjoyable. So don't worry if you haven't got an all-terrain bike. But of course you need to be a bit more clever with your route and ensure that all of your route is on the road, because the last thing you want to do is find yourself going off the beaten track, having a problem because your tyres just aren't suitable for that sort of terrain. So now you've established which bike you're going to use, you need to think about how you're going to carry your stuff with you. Now, there's a few ways of doing that. The most traditional way is to use panniers. Now, a lot of older bikes, especially touring bikes or commuter bikes, have eyelets for pannier racks that you can basically fit a pannier rack to. You can then start to put the bags on, and that means you can carry quite a lot of stuff without having to have it on your body. Don't worry if your bike doesn't have those or you haven't got panniers, because you can just go bikepacking with a rucksack. Just because you see nowadays everybody has specific bikepacking gear, that doesn't mean that you need it. It's more of a luxury than anything. If you're going to take stuff with you, you can just use a rucksack, and that's absolutely fine. That's actually what I did for my first few trips, and to be honest, I didn't really know any different because I'd never used panniers before or bikepacking bags. But now I don't quite like the feeling of having things on my back, so I don't use it. But if you haven't got anything else, a rucksack is absolutely fine. So looking at your packing situation, the first thing you need to think about is, what do I need? Now, everybody makes the mistake, even myself, I do it all the time. I overpack, and it's something that everybody does. So you've got to think about it from this point of view. What do I absolutely need that I can't be without? Everything else is a luxury. Everything that you might need is something that we can put in later. So the first things that you absolutely need, assuming you're going to go down the camping route, is somewhere to sleep, so a tent or a bivvy bag, a sleeping bag, especially if it's colder. You're going to need to make sure you've brought warm things with you. And the thing that really changed my bikepacking adventures was that I started bringing a sleeping mat with me. I used to, when I was a bit younger, maybe 5-10 years ago, I would just sleep on the ground and it wouldn't bother me. But over time, it starts to get more and more uncomfortable. So nowadays, I use an inflatable sleeping mat, and it means I can sleep much more soundly. And there's nothing worse, I tell you, than having a really bad night's sleep and then having to cycle again the following day. So that's definitely a top tip. But as a bare minimum, you need a tent or a bivy bag and a sleeping bag. Another misconception is that you actually have to camp when you're bikepacking. I disagree with that, to be honest. I think wherever you go, it's going to be an adventure. My first couple of bikepacking trips, I stayed in B&Bs. It was great. I absolutely loved it. You don't have to camp. So if that's something you're a bit nervous about, you might want to ease into that slowly. There's nothing wrong at all with cycling from bed and breakfast to hotel or Airbnbs. Just think about what you're comfortable doing. Don't stretch yourself too far. Don't worry about what anybody else thinks. Just do it your way. So we've got our sleeping arrangement sorted, be it camping or staying in a B&B. The other thing you need to think about is cooking, food. Now, some people again make the mistake, and I know myself and my dad have done it, where we've packed way too much stuff and it ends up weighing a ton. Now, food and cooking equipment is very heavy naturally, so it's something that if you can do without it for your first trip. I think as a bare minimum, if you know you're going somewhere where there are shops and cafes, make sure you've got money with you, obviously. Just take some snacks with you and plenty of water, and that should be enough. However, if you do want to cook, I will include some links to my website in this description so you can look at the stuff that I use. Now, typically, I use a little gas stove, a little stove that goes on top of the gas, and then one pot which will have a couple of cups and some cutlery inside. That allows me to, if I want to have a hot drink, I can heat up some water. If I want to heat up some soup, or if I want to heat up, like I said, water to put into some sort of ready meal, then I can do. And that allows a lot of options with quite a small package. So if you want to start cooking, I would recommend, by looking at the things that I've suggested, starting out with those. If you want to progress and start doing a little bit more cooking, you can start to take larger cooking pans with you, maybe ingredients that's more perishable that you want to use more frequently so that they go off, make sure that you use them. You may even, if you're really wild, want to go out and catch your own food, be it fish or maybe do some hunting or something like that, or foraging, so that you've got something to eat on an evening. So the other thing we need to think about is your electronics. Now, the first thing, probably quite obvious to most people, is you're going to need your phone with you. So you need to make sure that that's charged up. The last thing you want is to have an emergency and then not be able to contact anybody. So I'm sure you do, everybody does these days, they have a phone with them at all times, but make sure you take that with you. It's even more important if you are navigating using your phone, i.e. you're following a map that you created, which we'll cover later in the video. You need to make sure that you've got some way of charging that so that it doesn't die. Other things you need to think about charging are your bike lights, because if you're doing longer days in the saddle, or you have to stop for some sort of repair, or you're doing it in winter where the days are shorter, you need to make sure you've got those charged up so that you can keep going if the sun does set. So how do you charge these devices? Now, what I do is I take a battery pack with me. They're quite cheap. You can pick them up on Amazon. There's a link to one I use in the description. It's an Anker 20,000 milliamp battery, and it's got 2 USB ports. That lasts for most devices literally days, so I don't need to charge it. Once it's fully charged, it will charge my phone, my watch, my Garmin computer, my lights, all of that for days, and it doesn't run out. So if you're going on your first trip, that would be absolutely fine. So just a few other things that I think you definitely need to pack, and everything else isn't essential. You've got your sleeping equipment, you've got your food and cooking equipment if you're taking that. You've got a way of charging your electronics. The last thing you need is emergency clothing. So depending on where you live, now I live in the UK, so the weather is very unpredictable. You need to be prepared for all types of weather. So the first thing, and the most important thing in my view, is taking some form of waterproof jacket. They can pack down really, really small, so I always have one in my panniers in the top bag. So it means that if I'm caught short and it's raining, I can just whip out that and put that on. They can also be really good if you're getting cold, because those waterproofs tend to retain a lot of heat. They don't let the heat escape. So if you are really cold, even just having that thin layer, it doesn't look like much, but it does go a long way to keeping you warm. As well as that, you probably want to have something to sleep in. Now, some people sleep in their cycling kit. I don't like doing that. I get quite uncomfortable and I feel like my skin's really itchy if I wear cycling kit for more than 12, 15 hours. So I always take something to sleep in. Just if it's just a pair of pants and a t-shirt, that's absolutely fine. But make sure you've got something comfortable to get out of, especially if it's been raining, because you want some chance to dry off your cycling kit and get into something dry so that you can sleep properly. You could take this to the extreme and take every possible permutation of weather clothing. However, I think that's probably overkill. The things that I always take is a waterproof, a spare set of clothes. I do occasionally take things like a hat and some gloves, just if it's especially cold, but usually it's just the waterproof and the spare change of clothes. Okay, so we've got our stuff ready. How do we plan the perfect bikepacking trip? There are 3 things that I look for when planning a trip. There are other things to think about, but here's a good guide. Number 1 is scenery. So I want to go to places that take my breath away. That's the whole point for me of bikepacking, is to go somewhere different and be amazed. So I look for national parks, that's always a good bet. Areas of outstanding natural beauty here in the UK, you can just go on Google Maps and zoom in on green spaces and it typically tells you where they are. So pick one at random or pick one near where you live and head out there. That would be my first bet. Once you've chosen your amazing scenery, I like to think about the wilderness factor. So how wild is this ride going to be? Now, if you've got a mountain bike, or a cyclocross bike, you can get away with going a little bit more wild. But given that it's your first bikepacking trip, I would probably try and keep it sort of fairly low on the wilderness factor for now, just in case things go wrong. But what I mean by that is I want to feel like I've escaped. It's a sense of escapism. You can do that anywhere. I've done it in London. If you want to see that film, just click the card on the top right hand corner of your screen. I've done it in other cities up in the north. I've done it in the Lake District. Wherever it is, I want to feel like I'm getting away from it all. So that's where that wilderness factor comes in. So when we're planning our route, we probably want to think about quieter roads, cycle tracks, national cycle network, things like that just remove you from the everyday. And the last thing I think about, number 3, is accessibility. Now, it doesn't sound very exciting, but you do need to think about a couple of things. Number 1, how are you going to get there? If it's miles and miles and miles away in the middle of nowhere, it's going to be more of a challenge, naturally. If it's near a train station, for example, that's great. You want to think, unfortunately, on your first trip, worst case scenario. If there's a problem with your bike, or if you get lost, you want to know that you can find a way of getting home without having to panic. If you're stuck in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness of Scotland with no phone signal, that's going to be a real challenge for you. However, if you're 5 minutes cycle from a train station or a couple of miles walk, if your bike's completely broken and you've got full signal, it's not as stressful and it's a nice way of easing into it. And even to this day, I still look for places that I can get to by train that I know aren't too in the sticks, because things do go wrong. I've made an entire series of things that go wrong. If you want to see that, just click the playlist up there. Even for someone like myself who goes bikepacking every month, I still encounter problems. So it's always good to think about that. How are you going to get there and how are you going to get back, especially if there's some form of problem? Okay, so we've thought about all of those things. We've got our gear, we know what we're looking for in a bikepacking trip. Now, how do we plan the route? The first thing I would suggest is look locally to where you live. I don't care where you live, there's always somewhere to get those 3 things, to get the scenery, to get the wilderness with decent accessibility. The reason you want to stay local is for the third point, really. It's the accessibility. And if there's a problem, you want to know you're not far from home so you can get it fixed. Because, like I've said before, if it's your first trip, you don't really want to jump in at the deep end. You want to make sure you're taking it steady. So, stay locally, number 1. Looking at your route then, we need to think about your bike. So if it's a mountain bike, again, you can maybe look a little bit more off-road. If it's a road bike, we want to stick to the roads. So, how do I actually do it? What do I use? For years and years and years now, I've been using MapMyRide. Now, in the last few years, Komoot has become really popular, and I know my dad uses that, but every time I try to use Komoot, I just find it really clunky. I don't know what it is. I like to really hone in on the detail and map my route specifically. I don't know how to do that with Komoot. I might just be a bit of an idiot and I've not been able to do it. So if you do know how, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you because I know it's got a lot more benefits, but I find MapMyRide so easy to use. Let's plan a bikepacking route together. MapMyRide is a free service. All you need to do is log in and create an account. I'm sure there's some form of premium option, but I've never used that, and I've been using it for probably about 10 years now. So if you want to start and create a route, just go to Routes and click Create Route. So you need to search for where you want to do the route. Now I want to do our route in Leeds. I know Leeds quite well, but it's quite a major city in the north of the UK, and I want to show you that you can map a route from pretty much anywhere. There's a few things you need to think about. There are a lot of lines on the map. These dark green lines tend to be shared paths. Now, they're usually okay for cycling. However, they're not always, which isn't very helpful. So what we need to do is make sure that we're checking as we're going along. These dashed lines, these long dashed lines, tend to be footpaths, which you can't ride on. They're not allowed. So if you do come across one of those, the map software will try and take you down those occasionally. So just make sure that you're looking at that. You can't ride on those. The dotted lines, however, tend to be cycle-friendly routes or parts of the National Cycle Network or bridle paths. So they're absolutely fine to be cycling on. Just a few things to consider before we start. Coming back to the three things that I said were really important. Number one is scenery. So we want to go somewhere that's really spectacular. Number two was wilderness. I want to be removed from the everyday. And number three was accessibility. So I want to be able to get there really easily from Leeds. As opposed to cycling through the city centre, I would like to get a train somewhere because I know that's really easy. I can take my bike on there and I can get straight to the action. Zoom out and have a look for some areas that are predominantly green or have got some points of interest. We can see here there's Nidderdale, area of outstanding natural beauty, and there's also the Yorkshire Dales National Park. So if I was living in the centre of Leeds and I wanted to go somewhere a bit more remote, these would be my first options. So the nearest to me, and I can get there by train as well. Zooming in a little bit then, I would like to get somewhere where there's a train station. So I look for major towns and I look for the National Rail symbol there. So there's one there. There's also one in the centre of Ilkley. And there's some further out towards Skipton, etc. I know that from memory, but either way, if you're not sure, just zoom in and have a look around. You'll find that there's train stations all over the place. And depending on how direct they are, that might be the best option. So because I want to go to this green area here, both Nidderdale and the Yorkshire Dales, we might be able to do a bit of both, I'm going to head down to Ilkley. I'm going to start my route at the train station. So I'll just click and that will bring up our start point. You need to tick auto follow roads if you're using the roads. Otherwise, you're going to have to be very, very accurate and it will move about and basically draw direct lines from one point to the next, which is not what you want. You want it to follow the road. I also tick avoid highways. That will stop you going down accidentally the motorway or very busy A roads. So just tick that if you can. If for whatever reason the country that you're doing this in doesn't allow you to do bike directions, I've done it before where I've mapped some abroad, you can just do walking directions and it will do mostly the same thing. So just bear that in mind if the bike's not working. So we've started in Ilkley and I want to do a loop and I want to see a few exciting points. Things to look out for on the map are these picture icons. So the Stainburn Forest, Arms Cliff, which I know about, but if you're not sure what they are, just click them and you can get taken to Google and research what they are. So I think what might be really good is if we followed a little bit of the National Cycle Network, took in some scenery and maybe did a loop and came back down to Ilkley. We could just do one night, which I think is more than enough for your first bikepacking trip, but it's going to tick all those boxes I talked about. So let's start at Ilkley. I think we'll head over to Bolton Abbey over here. There's a lot of scenery around here, things of interest, which of course we want. So we'll start at Ilkley, and if you zoom in, you can start to look in a little bit more detail in terms of the directions. Now I would avoid, if you can, the busy A roads. That one's not too bad, to be honest, but if you can, try and stick to the B roads. So if you want to have another look, or a closer look, just drag the Google Street Man over the road, and you can have a look and see for yourself what it is that you'll be cycling on. And there's a cyclist there, so it's obviously a popular route, and you can see it looks really nice. It doesn't look like a bad place to ride at all, so I'm happy with that. I would keep periodically checking the route as well using that Google Street option. So let's have a look down here. Looks a little bit hilly, but that's Yorkshire. That looks really nice, a lovely place to cycle. So we'll head up there, keeping an eye on where we want to go, which is Bolton Abbey. Let's go up Langbar, which is actually a very hilly part of Yorkshire. But hover the man over and you can see why I'm coming up here. Look at that. Amazing scenery. And not really many people about, which is fantastic. So coming over Langbar, it does look like we're going to have to join the main road just a little bit here. Let's see if there's a path. There's a footpath, which is handy. Not really supposed to ride on them, but if you're a bit worried, if it's your first trip, I don't see any reason why you couldn't. Ah, look, there is a little cycle route down there. Looks a little bit maybe not suitable for road bikes, but if we have a look, that's exactly at that point. Brilliant. That's why I do the Google Street sometimes, because you wouldn't necessarily notice that. Let's see if we can go down here. Right, so when things like this occasionally happen, because obviously it's trying to map onto tiny little paths, what I would recommend you do is you undo, click off auto follow roads, and do that. Now we're on the path, we can do back on the follow roads, and there you go, works perfectly. So there we go, that should take us to Bolton Abbey. Now this dashed line is a footpath, and we can triple check that. Have a look at these 360 orbs. That's a little bit off, but again, doesn't look particularly cycle friendly around there, right by the river. So that's a footpath. We'll carry on to Bolton Abbey. I'll head down there just so I can have a look at the stepping stones and the Bolton Priory, which is a great point of interest, and then we'll head off again. Just checking the road every so often. You can see a lovely B road, no cars there at all, which is a good sign. We've got points of interest on the right, so if you want to make a note of that, you can, or you can make a point of actually mapping the route right down to the location. More historical points of interest there. And we're getting to a dotted line now, which, remember, was part of the National Cycle Network. And you can see, if we go up to this junction, there should be some signs, there we go, that tell you exactly that this is a cycle path. It's part of the Dales Way at that point, and the scenery is absolutely beautiful. Typically the cycle sections, these dotted lines, tend to be very low on traffic, which is another bonus. So there's a campsite here, and there's also a little lodge place there. So if you are looking for places to stay, which we'll come to, you need to bear that in mind. I would always keep an eye on the mileage here. So if you know that you maybe would struggle to do more than a certain amount of miles, make sure that you've got some accommodation sorted before that point. You don't want to be cycling miles and miles out into the middle of nowhere to find that there's nowhere to stay. Unless you're wild camping, of course, but maybe we'll touch on that in another video. So following the cycle path here, we can see there's another point of interest, Stumpcross Caverns. That might be something you want to look at. I want to be thinking a little bit now about where we're going to stay, because although we've done 15 miles, I know it's very hilly around here, and we don't want to get too far in the middle of nowhere. So you can see just around here, there's a couple of camping options here. That might be a good option to stay at. So this camping and glamping site, assuming you're going to camp. Obviously, if you're going to stay in a B&B, you've got potentially more options. But looking this way, we could go to Greenhow Hill. Let's have a look here, make sure this is a road. Good sign. You can see the cycle network sign there, look. Always good. Good sign. We head down here. Maybe let's go do a little loop of the reservoir and then come and stay at the campsite here. So that's 23 miles, which I think, bearing in mind it's in the Yorkshire Dales, which is very hilly, I think that's absolutely fine for a first bikepacking trip, even if you're more experienced. What I would say is you will find that you'll be much more tired when you're bikepacking as opposed to when you're training, because it's a little bit different. It's not high intensity, it's not a couple of hours on and then get home and rest. It's steady, zone 1, zone 2, and you can be out for quite a while, especially if you're doing lots of stops and you've got lots of stuff with you. You're naturally going to go much slower. So I'm happy with that. I think that's a basic bikepacking route. We've got points of interest, we've got scenery, and we've got accessibility. So this is a great option. Once you're happy with that, all you need to do is name it. You can see I've already written that one before. Day 1 in the Yorkshire Dales, and save it as a bike ride. Click save. That's your route done. Once your route is saved like this, it will come up with a page. Now you've got a few options. You can either go to more and download the GPX. So if you're someone who has a Garmin or a bike head unit of some kind, like a Wahoo, for example, you can download the GPX and you can export it and put it onto your bike computer, which gives you turn-by-turn directions, which is fantastic. If you haven't got that, if you're just taking your phone with you, you can download the MapMyRide app. And on the app, you can download the route and you can actually use the route via the app, or you can just keep referring to it so you know that you're not getting lost. That's a really good option for people who haven't got a bike computer. So that's day 1 done. Now, if I wanted to go back to Ilkley, that would be quite a short day, but that might be absolutely fine. You could do a loop, or you could look for a different train station, perhaps Skipton, or somewhere a little bit further in, like Harrogate, for example. So to do that, we just head back to our main menu. And what I would do is I would right-click, open in a new tab, create a new route. The reason I started a new tab is I want to reference where I was before. So if we go back to our day 1, have a look through, it was there, this campsite, exactly here. So we'll click again and that'll give us our new start point, which is exactly where we finished the day before. I think what I'll do is I'll change it up a little bit. Instead of going back to Ilkley, I will head across to Harrogate and I'll show you some other options that you can use. So starting at the campsite, let's go back up the hill that we came the day before. These are all really minor B roads, you can see, quite narrow. A little bit more removed. It's lovely. Just what we want. And what I want to show you is this section here. Across the UK, we have a lot of ex-railway lines that have been converted into bike paths. And this is a really good option when you're doing bikepacking trip because they're entirely traffic free. They're usually dead flat because of the fact that trains used to run on them, and they can avoid the main roads and take you to new places. So what we can do is head to this village here, Ripley. Now these are all B roads, which is great. B roads are my preferred option. So once we get to Ripley, you can see there's this dark green line, which I said at the beginning of this video is a shared use path. As you can see, it says the Nidderdale Greenway, and typically greenways are shared use ex-railways. So if we have a look, there's some orbs here that might give us an indication of what it looks like. There you go, somebody's gone out on their bike and done this, thankfully, and a lot of people do this, so it's usually very useful. You can see that's National Cycle Network there, and it's an old railway, so it's dead straight, lovely surface, and that takes you again off the beaten track. So let's head down there, along the Greenway, which completely takes you away from all the roads. That can take you all the way into Harrogate. There's also a train station here, so that's absolutely perfect for what we're looking for. We can head into the main town. That's where it ends, look. And let's just get to roughly to the station and it'll map the route for us there. So that's a much shorter day. If you wanted to extend it, you absolutely can. But I wanted to show you the ex-railways because they're a really great option and they're really easy to find. They're usually the long, straight, dark green lines that take away from the main road. So that's an option. That could be our day 2. But I hope that gave you a little bit of an insight into how I plan my route. It's not a quick process, But by doing it this way, I think you get to see all of your options. You get to almost micro analyze the location so you know exactly where you're going. And I found that when I actually get to those locations, even if I've never been before, it still feels quite familiar because I've usually run through most of the route on Google Street. So I hope you found that tutorial helpful. Thank you very much for watching my bikepacking video. I hope you feel more confident now so that you can go out and tackle your first bikepacking adventure, and let me know how it goes. Leave a comment in the comments box below. If you have any questions, leave them in there. I'm more than happy to help. I know it can be a little bit daunting at first, but once you've got over that hump and you've done it a few times, it can be really enjoyable and it's very addictive. So do let me know how it goes. If you would like to support me further, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a thumbs up and leaving a comment. All of those things go such a long way to helping this channel be found by other bike packers, other people interested in cycling. So all of that goes such a long way, and I really, really appreciate that. So all the best, and I will see you in the next video.